Hidden deep within the heart of southern Africa lies a mystery built in stone, an ancient city untouched by time, echoing the grandeur of a lost civilization. This isn't a story you've heard before. This isn't Egypt. This isn't Rome. This is Great Zimbabwe, a kingdom once filled with gold, echoing voices of royalty, merchants, and stone masons who shaped an empire from granite without a single drop of mortar. A city with walls towering over 30 feet high, a monument that stands as both a marvel and a riddle. Who built this city? Why here? And why was it abandoned? For centuries, the outside world denied Africa the credit. Colonial explorers crafted wild theories saying Phoenicians or aliens must have built it, because how could Africans possibly create something so magnificent? But the truth is far richer, far older, and far more African than they ever imagined. In this video, we'll take you back nearly 1,000 years, to the peak of Great Zimbabwe's power. You'll walk through the maze-like stone alleys, hear the clinking of gold in the marketplaces, and witness the spiritual rituals held under open skies. We'll uncover the secrets buried beneath its ruins, challenge the colonial lies, and piece together the story of a civilization that traded across oceans and built with mathematical precision. But this isn't just about ruins and rocks. It's about identity, legacy, and the resilience of a people whose story was almost erased. Why did this mighty city fall? Was it climate change, trade collapse, political intrigue? We'll explore the leading theories and maybe, just maybe, leave you with new questions. Imagine a place where wealth met wisdom, where architecture danced with astronomy, and where power flowed not from conquest, but from trade, knowledge, and spiritual reverence. That place was real. That place was Great Zimbabwe. If you think you know history, think again. Great Zimbabwe will challenge everything you thought you knew about Africa's past. So stay with us as we unlock the stone gates of this forgotten city. Trust me, you won't see Africa the same way again. Before we can understand the greatness of Zimbabwe, we must first ask, where exactly was this city, and what made it so special? Great Zimbabwe was nestled in the southeastern hills of modern-day Zimbabwe near the town of Masvingo. The name Zimbabwe itself comes from the Shona phrase Dzimba Dzamabwe, meaning houses of stone. And when you see the ruins, the name makes perfect sense. This ancient city wasn't a fortress perched on a hill, nor a temple hidden in a jungle. It was a sprawling complex of stone buildings divided into three main areas: the hill complex, the great enclosure, and the valley ruins. The hill complex was the earliest and likely served as a royal acropolis, commanding a view of the surrounding land. The great enclosure, with its iconic circular stone wall, is the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara, and the valley ruins scattered below once housed thousands of people. But Great Zimbabwe was more than its architecture. It was a cultural and economic powerhouse. Situated strategically between gold mines and trade routes linking to the Swahili coast, it became a center of commerce. Gold, ivory, cattle, and ceramics moved in and out of its gates. Archaeologists have even found Chinese porcelain and Persian glass in its soil, evidence of a city connected to the world far beyond Africa. At its height between the 11th and 15th centuries, Great Zimbabwe may have been home to 10,000 to 20,000 people. Imagine that, an advanced, bustling metropolis in the heart of the African continent, while much of Europe still reeled from medieval turmoil. This wasn't a tribal settlement. This was an urban state. Its stone walls were built without mortar, using a technique called dry stone masonry. Each granite block was meticulously shaped to interlock perfectly. These walls weren't just functional, they were symbolic. Some scholars believe the curving forms represented feminine power or cosmic unity. Whatever the meaning, the engineering is nothing short of genius. What makes Great Zimbabwe even more fascinating is that it was constructed entirely from locally sourced granite, chiseled, hauled, and arranged with stunning precision. No iron reinforcements, no imported tools, just knowledge, skill, and ambition. Beyond the grand structures, everyday life thrived in its shadows. Markets buzzed with trade, livestock grazed beyond the walls, and spiritual ceremonies tied the people to their ancestors and the land. The city pulsed with life, pride, and a profound sense of place. Despite the city's magnitude, there are no written records left by its builders. That silence makes the ruins all the more powerful. Every stone, every wall, every pathway whispers a story waiting to be uncovered. In the next section, we'll dive into how this monumental city came to be. Who were the first people to settle here? What sparked its creation? And how did a simple stone hill transform into the heart of a mighty African kingdom? Long before Great Zimbabwe reached its peak, the land was alive with smaller communities, each planting the seeds of what would become one of Africa's most powerful kingdoms. But the question remains, how did this stone civilization begin? The earliest traces of settlement in the area date back to the 4th century CE, but it wasn't until around the 9th century that we begin to see signs of serious development. Early inhabitants, ancestors of the Shona people, started organizing their societies into small chiefdoms. These communities grew maize, raised cattle, and mined local minerals, especially gold. Over time, as wealth accumulated and trade intensified, the stage was set for something greater. By the 11th century, the society began to centralize under powerful leaders. These chiefs or kings didn't just rule with strength, they ruled with strategy. They began organizing labor, managing food surplus, and controlling trade. This enabled them to direct the construction of permanent stone buildings, an unprecedented feat in the region. What makes this development extraordinary is that no external empire or invader imposed this progress. It was entirely homegrown. Indigenous innovation, resource management, and trade dynamics combined to create a foundation sturdy enough to support monumental architecture. The rise of stone structures marks the beginning of Great Zimbabwe as a defined urban center. At first, these structures were relatively modest: stone crawls for cattle, storage buildings for grain, and enclosures for elite residences. But with each passing generation, the designs grew more ambitious. The hill complex began to take shape, serving both as a fortress and a religious hub. Here, kings were likely crowned, rituals performed, and decisions made that affected the entire region. At the heart of this development was control over gold. Great Zimbabwe sat between some of the richest gold fields in southern Africa and the trade routes that led to the Swahili coast. This gave its rulers immense leverage. They didn't just mine gold, they minted influence. From there, gold traveled to cities like Kilwa, onto ships bound for Arabia, India, and China. In return, Great Zimbabwe received foreign luxuries, beads, textiles, and porcelain. But make no mistake, this wasn't just about trade. It was about identity. As the city expanded, it became a symbol of cultural pride. The decision to build in stone was more than practicality. It was a declaration. These were a people who intended to last. While oral traditions about Great Zimbabwe's founding are scarce and often mythologized, one recurring narrative speaks of a powerful builder king who unified the tribes and led the creation of the first great stone walls. Whether fact or legend, this myth underscores the importance of leadership and vision in the city's birth. Even today, the ingenuity of these early builders commands respect. They understood the land, harnessed its materials, and crafted a vision that would defy centuries of erasure. Every wall they built was an act of defiance against time. In this crucible of stone, soil, and spirit, a civilization began to rise. Great Zimbabwe wasn't built overnight. It was the culmination of centuries of adaptation, innovation, and ambition. And what began as scattered settlements soon formed the political and spiritual heart of a powerful kingdom. Next, we journey into the golden age of this city, where wealth flowed freely, kings ruled from stone thrones, and Great Zimbabwe became a name spoken from the interior of Africa to the coastlines of the Indian Ocean. By the 13th century, Great Zimbabwe was no longer just a city in the making. It had become a powerhouse, a thriving capital of a kingdom stretching across southern Africa. This was its golden age, both literally and figuratively. Gold lay at the heart of Great Zimbabwe's rise. The kingdom's access to vast gold deposits gave it economic muscle unlike any in the region. Traders flocked to its markets, bringing cloth, glass beads, porcelain, and spices from as far as Persia, India, and China. Archaeologists have unearthed thousands of these artifacts, each a silent testimony to how connected this African kingdom was to the broader world. But this wasn't just a trade post. Great Zimbabwe was the center of a sophisticated political system. At the top stood a powerful king, often called the Mambo, whose authority was both spiritual and secular. He lived in seclusion within the stone walls of the hill complex, separated from the common people. His presence was considered sacred, and many believed he could communicate with ancestral spirits. Under the Mambo's rule, a hierarchical society thrived. Nobles, traders, craftsmen, farmers, and laborers all played roles in maintaining the city's prosperity. The elite lived in stone enclosures while the majority resided in mud brick homes outside the main walls. Despite this divide, the city functioned with remarkable cohesion. Gold wasn't the only treasure. Cattle were a key indicator of wealth and social status. A man's influence was often measured by how many cattle he owned. These animals weren't just economic assets. They played central roles in marriage, ceremonies, and even spiritual life. Offerings of cattle accompanied prayers to the ancestors and were seen as a way to ensure harmony with the natural and spiritual world. And then there was the architecture. The great enclosure, an elliptical structure with walls standing up to 36 feet high and extending over 800 feet in circumference, was likely constructed during this period. Inside, a conical tower rises with no clear function, but deep symbolic power. Was it a granary, a symbol of royal authority, or perhaps a representation of the spiritual world? No one knows for sure, but its presence dominates the inner space like a monument to mystery. This architectural splendor was more than aesthetic. It reinforced authority. The physical separation between elite and commoner, sacred and profane, was built into the very design of the city. To walk through its stone alleys was to pass through layers of power and belief. What made this golden age so remarkable was its scale. The kingdom's territory stretched across modern-day Zimbabwe, parts of Mozambique and Botswana. Satellite settlements echoed the stone-building traditions of the capital, acting as nodes in a vast trade and political network. The influence of Great Zimbabwe extended across regions, shaping the cultural and political fabric of southern Africa. The economy was not purely extractive, it was dynamic. In addition to gold, iron was mined and crafted into tools and weapons. Agriculture flourished with crops like millet and sorghum, and trade routes were safeguarded by alliances and the military strength of the Mambo's armies. The spiritual life of Great Zimbabwe was just as rich. Rituals were held at sacred sites, often involving music, dance, and the burning of herbs to honor the ancestors. The Mambo was both ruler and high priest, his legitimacy tied directly to his spiritual connection with the land and its people. The city was alive with symbolism. from the carved soapstone birds believed to represent royal totems to the placement of enclosures that mirrored celestial movements. This was not a society lacking complexity. It was a civilization of engineers, diplomats, merchants, farmers, and mystics. A city of stone and gold, of strategy and spirituality. And it wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. People from distant lands spoke of this inland kingdom, where wealth flowed like rivers and architecture rivaled ancient wonders. Great Zimbabwe had become a legend in its own time, but all golden ages have their shadows. Beneath the wealth and wonder, pressures were building. Population growth strained resources, climate shifts affected agriculture, and rival powers began to rise. The very forces that had made Great Zimbabwe rich, trade, expansion, and prestige, would soon test its resilience. Still, for over 2 centuries, Great Zimbabwe stood as a beacon of African brilliance. A city where gold was abundant, power was divine, and walls whispered tales of greatness. Next, we examine those very walls, how they were built, what they meant, and why they continue to inspire awe centuries later. Among the many marvels of Great Zimbabwe, none are as iconic or as mystifying as its architecture. These structures, silent and unmortared, have stood for centuries, but how were they built? And what do they tell us? The first thing that strikes any visitor is the sheer scale. The stone walls, built from locally quarried granite, rise as high as a 3-story building in some places and extend for hundreds of feet. No mortar holds these blocks together. Instead, they are fitted with precision using a technique known as dry stone masonry. Each stone was hand-chiseled, carefully chosen and placed to lock with the others. The result? Walls that have survived weather, erosion, and time itself. This wasn't a haphazard effort. It was deliberate, technical, and deeply symbolic. The stones were often laid in patterns, chevrons, herringbones, and other repeating designs. These weren't just decorative flourishes, they carried meaning. Some scholars believe they represented fertility, unity, or even the cosmos. To the builders of Great Zimbabwe, walls weren't just barriers, they were statements. The 3 major areas, the hill complex, the Great Enclosure, and the valley ruins, each served a different purpose. The hill complex, perched on a rocky outcrop, was likely the political and spiritual center. Narrow stone passageways wind between terraces, suggesting a labyrinthine ceremonial path. From here, the Mambo could observe his domain and commune with the ancestors. The Great Enclosure is, perhaps, the most famous part of the ruins. Its outer wall, over 800 feet in circumference, houses the mysterious conical tower. Standing almost 30 feet tall, this tower remains one of the site's greatest enigmas. Was it a granary, a shrine, or a symbol of male authority? Theories abound, but its true purpose remains unknown. Then there are the valley ruins, residential areas likely inhabited by the nobility and artisan class. Here, the stonework is less massive, but still follows the same principles of design and durability. What's remarkable is that these constructions occurred over multiple generations. The city evolved, expanded, and was refined as the society grew. Older sections show smaller, simpler walls. Later additions boast taller, more complex structures. This wasn't static architecture, it was a living tradition. The decision to build in stone was revolutionary. In a region where mud and wood were the standard, stone conveyed power, permanence, and prestige. It declared to the world and to the people within that this city was meant to last. Yet, despite their grandeur, no 2 walls are exactly alike. The builders embraced imperfection, allowing the organic shapes of the granite to guide their designs. This created an architectural language that was both functional and poetic. Perhaps what's most awe-inspiring is the anonymity of the craftsmen. We don't know their names. No monuments were built to honor them, and yet Their legacy towers above the African landscape to this day. The architecture of Great Zimbabwe was more than just engineering. It was philosophy carved into stone. It reflected a worldview that respected nature, honored the past, and aspired toward permanence. These weren't just walls, they were memories etched in granite. In a time when many view African history through the lens of colonial narratives, the architecture of Great Zimbabwe stands as a defiant counter-story. It proves that Africans were not just passive recipients of outside influence. They were innovators, engineers, and visionaries in their own right. In the next chapter, we explore the human side of the city, the religion, the rituals, the daily life, and the culture that brought stone walls to life, with music, spirit, and community. Beyond the grandeur of stone walls and royal power, Great Zimbabwe was a city teeming with daily rhythms, spiritual meaning, and cultural depth. To truly understand the life within the stones, we must look at how people lived, believed, and connected to their world. Religion was at the core of Great Zimbabwe's society. The Shona people, ancestors of the city's builders, believed in a world deeply intertwined with spirits and ancestors. The Maori religion, a belief system centered on a supreme creator god, was already taking form. But more immediate in daily life was the veneration of ancestral spirits. People believed their ancestors could influence health, prosperity, and fertility. To ignore them was to invite misfortune. Ceremonies were held to honor these spirits, often at sacred hills or in designated spaces within the stone structures. Music played a key role. Traditional instruments like the mbira, a thumb piano, accompanied chants and prayers. Drumming, clapping, and dancing weren't just entertainment, they were acts of communication with the spiritual realm. Rituals varied by season and purpose. Rain-making ceremonies, for instance, were crucial in an agriculturally dependent society. A drought wasn't just a natural event. It was seen as a sign that spiritual harmony had been disrupted. The Mambo, or local spiritual leaders, would intervene with offerings, songs, and pleas to the ancestors to restore balance. Everyday life revolved around extended families and communal cooperation. Most people lived in dhaka huts, circular homes made from mud and thatch, organized in clusters. Each cluster housed a family unit and included cooking areas, storage pits, and enclosures for animals. Women played central roles in society. They were responsible for farming, food preparation, child rearing, and pottery making. Their knowledge of agriculture and herbal medicine was essential. Men focused on herding, iron smelting, and trade. Craftsmanship was highly developed. Artisans shaped gold jewelry, carved soapstone birds, and created intricate pottery, some of which still survives today. Food was local and seasonal. Sorghum, millet, and maize were staple grains, often ground and cooked into porridge. Cattle provided milk and meat, while vegetables and wild fruits supplemented the diet. Brewing beer wasn't just a pastime. It was part of communal rituals and feasts, symbolizing hospitality and social cohesion. Education was oral and practical. Children learned by observing adults, helping in chores, and listening to elders tell stories. These tales carried lessons about bravery, wisdom, caution, and respect, core values of the society. Knowledge wasn't written in books, but in behavior, memory, and tradition. Trade wasn't just an elite pursuit. Marketplaces buzzed with activity as people exchanged goods, salt, cloth, livestock, iron tools, and pottery. These markets weren't just economic hubs. They were spaces for storytelling, matchmaking, and sharing news. In many ways, they were the social glue of Great Zimbabwe. Despite the divisions of class and gender, there's evidence of remarkable social cohesion. People lived in balance with their environment and with each other. Social harmony wasn't enforced by brute power, but by shared belief systems and mutual dependence. And then there was beauty. Great Zimbabwe was a city that celebrated artistry. From the precision of its walls to the delicate patterns etched into pottery, everything reflected a culture of care and creativity. Even the layout of homes and pathways seemed guided by principles of balance and flow. To walk through Great Zimbabwe in its prime would have meant hearing music in the air, smelling grain on the fire, and seeing children run through sunlit courtyards. It was a place of spirit and soil, wisdom and warmth. A city not just built by people, but lived in fully with love and meaning. Next, we explore the mysteries of its decline. How could such a vibrant, powerful, and spiritual city eventually fall into silence? As powerful as Great Zimbabwe was, no civilization is immune to decline. By the late 15th century, the city that once dazzled the world with its gold and grandeur began to fade into obscurity. But why? What brought the mighty city of stone and gold to its knees? The fall of Great Zimbabwe is a mystery still debated by historians and archaeologists. There was no dramatic invasion, no recorded war, no grand collapse carved into stone. Instead, the decline was likely gradual, an unraveling caused by multiple interwoven pressures. One major theory centers on environmental stress. By the 15th century, the population of Great Zimbabwe may have reached 20,000, perhaps more than the surrounding land could sustainably support. Overgrazing, deforestation, and soil exhaustion could have made farming and livestock herding increasingly difficult. As the food supply faltered, so too would the city's ability to sustain its population and prestige. Climate change may have played a role as well. Evidence suggests that the region experienced shifts in rainfall patterns around the time of the city's decline. Droughts would have hit agricultural yields hard, while also disrupting the rainmaking rituals that bound religion and leadership together. If the Mambo could no longer bring the rains, his spiritual legitimacy may have been called into question. Another factor was economic. Great Zimbabwe's power was built on trade, especially gold. But trade routes are not fixed in stone. New centers emerged to the north and east, closer to evolving maritime trade hubs. The rise of rival powers, such as the Mutapa Kingdom, shifted the balance of regional influence. As traders found new ports and partners, Great Zimbabwe's strategic advantage diminished. Internal tensions may have contributed too. As resources became scarcer and power more contested, factions within the elite could have splintered. While there's no direct evidence of civil war, political fragmentation is a plausible scenario. A kingdom built on unity could fracture under strain. And then there's the psychological toll. A city that once saw itself as divinely favored now faced famine, disorder, and decline. Morale likely eroded. The belief systems that had sustained generations began to crumble under the weight of real-world suffering. Once confident leaders may have faltered, and ordinary citizens may have lost faith in the sacred institutions that once bound them. Eventually, the ruling class may have simply moved. Archaeological evidence points to elites migrating northward to establish new centers of power, carrying their traditions with them. The spirit of Great Zimbabwe didn't vanish. It evolved, spread, and left its imprint on successor states like Mutapa. By the time Portuguese explorers began arriving on the East African coast in the 16th century, Great Zimbabwe was already abandoned. They heard whispers of a lost city inland, a stone metropolis of wealth and wonder. Some speculated wildly, crediting it to the Queen of Sheba or ancient Phoenicians, but it was neither myth nor foreign marvel. It was African, and its end, like its beginning, was deeply human. The silence of Great Zimbabwe is haunting. No epic battle, no cataclysm, just a slow retreat from glory. Its walls remained, empty and echoing, but within those echoes are clues, not just to its fall, but to its resilience. for even in abandonment, it was never forgotten. Today, Great Zimbabwe is a national symbol, a reminder of a time when African power, ingenuity, and pride shaped a kingdom that needed no validation from the outside world. Its fall is not a story of failure, it is a chapter in a larger legacy that still endures. Next, we reveal how that legacy was manipulated, misinterpreted, and reclaimed through colonial lies, archaeological battles, and a long journey back to truth. When European colonizers first encountered the ruins of Great Zimbabwe in the late 19th century, they were stunned, but also suspicious. The sheer sophistication of the stone architecture clashed violently with their deeply held racial prejudices. To them, the idea that indigenous Africans had built something so monumental was inconceivable. And so the myth-making began. Early European explorers and scholars proposed that the site had been constructed by outsiders, Phoenicians, Arabs, even biblical figures like the Queen of Sheba. These theories weren't just fanciful, they were deliberate. They allowed colonizers to justify their occupation by erasing African achievement and replacing it with foreign authorship. If Africans had never built a great civilization, the argument went, then they couldn't possibly govern one. This colonial narrative was bolstered by flawed archaeology. German explorer Karl Mauck, one of the first Europeans to examine the ruins, claimed the structures were of biblical origin. He even insisted he had found the palace of the Queen of Sheba. Later, British archaeologist James Theodore Bent echoed similar sentiments, dismissing any African link to the construction. But the tide began to shift in the early 20th century. Scholars like David Randall McIver and later Gertrude Caton Thompson used scientific methods to study the site and concluded definitively that Great Zimbabwe was built by Africans. Their findings were met with resistance. Colonial governments, especially the regime in then Rhodesia, suppressed this evidence because it contradicted the racist foundation of their rule. It wasn't until Zimbabwe's independence in 1980 that the full truth could finally be embraced. The ruins were reclaimed as a national symbol. The country was even named after them. The soapstone birds, once stolen by colonists, were returned and are now proudly displayed in the National Museum. Today, Great Zimbabwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a touchstone of African identity. School children learn its history with pride. Artists reinterpret its myths. Politicians invoke its legacy. But the battle for its legacy serves as a sobering reminder. History is not just about the past, it's about power. And for too long, that power was used to silence the very people who built this incredible city. In the next section, we explore what Great Zimbabwe means in the modern day and how its stones still speak across centuries. Great Zimbabwe may be a ruin, but it's far from forgotten. Today, the site stands not only as a national monument, but as a living symbol of pride, resilience, and identity for Zimbabweans and Africans across the continent. Situated just outside the town of Masvingo, the ruins attract thousands of visitors each year. Tourists walk among the massive stone walls, marvel at the craftsmanship, and peer through the same narrow passageways that once guided kings and priests. Guides share legends passed down through generations, breathing new life into the stones. The ruins are more than just a destination. They are a classroom, a spiritual site, and a mirror for national reflection. School children study Great Zimbabwe as part of the curriculum, learning not only the technical facts, but the importance of reclaiming African heritage. Ceremonies are still held on the hilltop during important national events. In 1980, when Zimbabwe gained independence, the new nation chose its name from the ancient city. Its currency once bore images of the soapstone birds. Its flag colors echoed the spirit of the ancestors. This wasn't just symbolism, it was a statement. that the story of Zimbabwe would no longer begin with colonialism, but with greatness. In recent years, efforts to preserve and protect the site have grown stronger. UNESCO designated Great Zimbabwe a World Heritage Site in 1986, ensuring international attention and funding. Conservation teams work to stabilize walls, document artifacts, and educate the public. But perhaps the greatest preservation effort is happening in the hearts and minds of the people. Great Zimbabwe is no longer just an archaeological site, it is a cultural anchor. It reminds Zimbabweans of their deep roots, their capacity for greatness, and the unshakable legacy carved into every stone. Up next, we return to the big picture. What does the story of Great Zimbabwe truly teach us? Great Zimbabwe is more than a collection of stone ruins. It is a message from the past, carved into granite, echoing across centuries. Its story rewrites what many thought they knew about Africa. It challenges outdated narratives, flips colonial myths on their heads, and reminds us that innovation, beauty, and power existed on this continent long before outsiders arrived. This was not a forgotten corner of the world. It was a hub of commerce, a beacon of architecture, a spiritual center, and a symbol of African excellence. It was a place where kings ruled not through conquest alone, but through connection, spiritual, cultural, and economic. A place where walls spoke not of division, but of identity and vision. What happened in Great Zimbabwe matters today. It matters because history isn't just about the past, it's about what we believe is possible. For generations, the story of Africa was told by those who sought to diminish it. But the stones of Great Zimbabwe refuse to stay silent. They speak of intelligence, order, artistry, and strength. They speak of people who built for the future. And now the future listens. This city, though quiet now, lives on in every Zimbabwean who walks with pride, every student who learns its story, and every traveler who sees its majesty firsthand. It lives on in every person who challenges false narratives and embraces the truth of African greatness. If you've made it this far, thank you, because telling this story matters, sharing it matters, reclaiming it matters, and you are now a part of that journey. Let Great Zimbabwe remind us that greatness is not always loud or immediate. Sometimes it's built stone by stone, in the quiet confidence of those who know who they are and what they stand for. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. There are many more untold stories from the heart of Africa waiting to be shared, and we'd love to have you with us on that journey. Until next time, stay curious and stay proud. African partial music with rhythmic drum. Oh, 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 epic and mysterious African partial music with rhythmic drum.